Pick one of my girls, human. I chose the ugliest one because she was very special. The bio-gel coating on Kale's ribs had finally stopped itching, which meant either the nanobots had finished their work or his nerve endings had simply given up. He pressed a finger against the sealed gash and winced. "Well, that's still tender," he muttered to the empty recovery pod, his voice echoing off the curved walls that pulsed with a soft blue luminescence. The Calathian healing chambers were impressive, he had to admit. Back on Earth, a wound like this would have meant weeks of conventional treatment, assuming you could even find a functioning hospital. Here, in the belly of this impossible city that clawed its way toward the violet sky, alien medicine could patch you up overnight. Of course, they only bothered healing you so you could potentially die more spectacularly in the next round of their twisted entertainment. Kale swung his legs over the edge of the pod and stood carefully. His balance felt solid enough, which was more than he could say for his fellow gladiators after last night's carnage. Through the translucent walls, he could see other pods glowing softly in the dim chamber. Most were empty now. The trials of Ascension had lived up to their reputation for reducing the contestant pool rather dramatically. "Morning, sunshine," came a gravelly voice from across the room. Marcus was sitting up in his pod, prodding at a line of sealed puncture wounds across his shoulder. "How's the room service in this 5-star resort?" "Terrible continental breakfast," Kale replied, stretching his arms above his head. "And the staff keeps trying to kill us. I'm definitely leaving a bad review." Marcus snorted, then immediately regretted it as the movement pulled at his injuries. "At least we're alive to complain. Poor Davidson won't be writing any reviews." The humor died between them for a moment. Davidson had been decent enough, for a former corporate security guard who'd somehow ended up in the same transport as the rest of them. The spider-like Calathian construct had taken him apart with surgical precision while the crowd cheered in 3 different languages. Kale walked to the chamber's viewing portal, a massive transparent wall that offered a breathtaking view of Calatha's impossible architecture. The city rose in terraced levels, each one supported by gravity manipulators that hummed with barely contained energy. Streams of light traced paths between the floating platforms where the wealthy lived, while far below, in the perpetual shadows, the labor district sprawled like a different world entirely. "You ever wonder what they're really getting out of this?" Marcus asked, joining him at the window. "I mean, sure, entertainment. But they've got holographic simulations that could probably put on a better show without all the mess." Kale watched a graceful transport glide between the upper spires, its passengers invisible behind tinted hull plating. "Maybe that's the point. Anyone can fake a death. Takes commitment to actually kill someone for fun." "Cheerful thought," Marcus said. "Remind me to put you in charge of morale speeches." The chamber door dilated open with a soft hiss, admitting a figure that made both humans instinctively straighten. The Calathian attendant was tall and willowy, with the characteristic elongated ears that swept back from her skull like elegant fins. Her skin held a faint luminescence that shifted between silver and pale gold, and her eyes were entirely too knowing for Kale's comfort. "The surviving champions will prepare for the ceremony of selection," she announced, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Calathians seemed to possess. "Lady Zarin requests your presence in the Sky Garden within the hour." Marcus nudged Kale with his elbow. "Sky Garden. That sounds ominous." "Everything here sounds ominous," Kale replied. "They probably call their bathrooms chambers of elimination, or something equally dramatic." The attendant's expression didn't change, but Kale caught the slightest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Either she understood more human speech than she let on, or bathroom humor was universal. "Ceremonial garments have been provided," she continued, gesturing toward an alcove that hadn't been there moments before. Calathian architecture had a disturbing habit of reshaping itself when you weren't looking. "Lady Zarin values presentation." After she left, Kale examined the clothing with skeptical appreciation. The fabric felt like liquid metal but moved like silk, and the cut was surprisingly flattering for something designed by aliens who probably considered humans to be roughly equivalent to trained bears. "Think they have our measurements on file, or is this whole thing custom-fitted?" Marcus asked, holding up a shirt that seemed to shimmer with its own light. "Probably scanned us while we were unconscious," Kale said, pulling on the strange garments. I'm just hoping they didn't take any other liberties while they were at it. The clothes adjusted themselves automatically as he moved, tightening here, loosening there, until they fit perfectly. It was disconcerting in a way that went beyond mere vanity. These people could manipulate matter at the molecular level, could heal grievous wounds overnight, could build cities that defied gravity itself. And yet they still found entertainment in watching primitive humans try to kill each other with sharp metal objects. Ready for whatever fresh hell awaits us? Marcus asked, checking his reflection in the polished wall. Cale straightened his shoulders and tried to look like someone who belonged in clothes worth more than most Earth cities. Ready as I'll ever be. Though I have to say, if this is their idea of reward ceremony, I'm curious what their punishments look like. Probably involves more spiders, Marcus said grimly. Definitely more spiders, Cale agreed, and together they walked toward whatever waited for them in Lady Zaren's sky garden, carrying their dark humor like armor against the beautiful, terrible world that had claimed them. The gravity lift carried them upward through the heart of Zaren's tower, past levels of opulence that made Cale's eyes water. Each floor they glimpsed through the transparent tube held wonders that would have bankrupted nations back on Earth. Rooms where liquid light flowed like waterfalls, gardens where crystalline trees sang in harmonious frequencies, chambers filled with floating sculptures that rearranged themselves in response to approaching footsteps. I'm starting to feel underdressed, Marcus muttered, watching a mechanical butterfly the size of his fist drift past the lift's exterior wall, its wings trailing stardust. Relax, Cale said. We're the entertainment. They probably expect us to look like barbarians. Speak for yourself. I showered. The lift slowed as they approached the tower's apex, and Cale's stomach performed an uncomfortable flip that had nothing to do with the deceleration. Through the transparent walls, the sky garden revealed itself in all its impossible glory. Floating platforms drifted in lazy orbits around a central dais, each one supporting impossible flora that glowed with bioluminescent beauty. The entire space was enclosed in a dome of crystalline material that offered a panoramic view of Calith stretching endlessly below. Well, Marcus said quietly, that's not intimidating at all. Lady Zaren stood at the garden's heart like a queen surveying her domain. She was tall even by Calathian standards, her elongated ears adorned with delicate chains of what looked like captured starlight. Her dress seemed to be cut from the night sky itself, complete with slowly moving constellations that shifted across the dark fabric. When she turned to regard the arriving humans, her smile held all the warmth of a surgical blade. Our victorious champions, she announced, her voice carrying easily across the space without seeming to raise in volume. You have provided excellent sport. Around the garden's perimeter, other Calathian nobles observed from their floating platforms. Cale counted at least a dozen, each one draped in wealth that could probably fund a small war. Their conversations continued in low musical tones, but he caught the way their eyes tracked every movement he and Marcus made. Feel like we're in a zoo, Marcus murmured from the corner of his mouth. At least zoo animals get fed regularly, Cale replied, then raised his voice. Lady Zaren, we're honored by your hospitality. Her laugh was like silver bells being dropped on marble. How charmingly primitive. Yes, I suppose you would consider this hospitality. She gestured toward the gathered nobles. These are representatives of various houses, here to witness the ceremony. Some have wagered considerable sums on the outcomes. Outcomes of what, exactly? Marcus asked. Why, your choices, of course. Zaren clasped her hands together, and the floating platforms began to drift closer to the central dais. But first, you must meet the prizes you have earned through your survival skills. A section of the garden floor dilated open, revealing another gravity lift. From it emerged 5 figures that made Cale's breath catch in his throat. 4 of them were clearly Zaren's daughters, bearing her aristocratic features but younger, more vibrant. Their beauty was the kind that belonged in classical paintings or fever dreams. Flawless skin that seemed to generate its own light, hair that moved as if stirred by unfelt breezes, eyes that held depths of color impossible in nature. My daughters, Zaren announced with obvious pride. Each one a masterpiece of genetic artistry. Genetic artistry? Marcus whispered. They don't believe in natural selection here, Cale murmured back. Everything's custom designed. The 4th daughter was everything her sisters were and more, if such a thing were possible. Where they were beautiful, she was transcendent. Where they glowed softly, she practically radiated luminescence. She smiled at the gathered humans with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her own perfection. But it was the fifth figure that drew Kale's attention. She stood slightly apart from the others, and while she shared the basic Calathian features, something was different. Her skin lacked the luminescent quality of her sisters, appearing almost dull by comparison. Her hair was a simple brown rather than the flowing metallic tones of the others. She was, by any measure, unremarkable. And this, Zarin said, her tone shifting to something that might have been embarrassment, is Lyra. The girl, woman, really, lifted her chin slightly at the introduction. Her eyes, Kale noticed, were different from her sisters'. Where theirs held confident beauty, hers held something deeper. Intelligence, maybe. Or resignation. Now then, Zarin continued, her theatrical manner returning, you have earned the right to choose. Each of you may select one of my daughters as your companion for the duration of your stay in Calath. Marcus leaned closer to Kale. Duration of our stay? How long are we talking here? Given their track record with gladiators, I'm guessing until we die horribly, Kale replied softly. Fantastic. Really taking the long view here. One of the observing nobles called out something in rapid Calathian, and Zarin's smile sharpened. House Veleth reminds me that the traditional choice is made in order of performance. Marcus of Earth, your courage in the arena was adequate. You may choose first. Marcus straightened his shoulders and stepped forward. His gaze moved across the four perfect daughters, lingering on each impossibly beautiful face. The nobles leaned forward with obvious interest, some consulting glowing tablets that probably tracked betting odds. Well, Marcus said, this is probably the weirdest Tuesday I've ever had. He gestured toward the second daughter, whose silver hair cascaded like liquid mercury. I choose her, I suppose. The chosen daughter smiled graciously and stepped forward, accepting Marcus's awkward bow with elegant poise. The nobles murmured approval, and several made notes on their devices. And now, Zarin said, turning those predatory eyes on Kale, our most innovative champion. Your performance was quite unexpected. The choice is yours. Kale felt every eye in the garden focus on him. The remaining three perfect daughters arranged themselves in a subtle display, each one a vision of alien beauty that would have inspired religions back on Earth. Their smiles were invitations to paradise, their poses calculated to showcase genetic perfection that had probably taken generations to achieve. And yet, his gaze kept drifting to Lyra, who stood quietly to one side, clearly expecting to be overlooked yet again. Tough choice, he said aloud, buying time. They're all incredibly beautiful. The perfect daughters preened slightly. Lyra's expression didn't change. Something in her stillness called to him. Maybe it was the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite being the obvious afterthought. Maybe it was the intelligence in her eyes that seemed to see right through the entire theatrical performance. Or maybe he was just contrary enough to want to upset everyone's expectations. I choose her, he said, pointing directly at Lyra. The silence that followed was deafening. The silence stretched long enough for Kale to wonder if he'd accidentally declared war on someone. Floating crystalline recording devices that had been humming quietly around the garden suddenly blazed with activity, their bioluminescent cores pulsing as they captured every angle of what was apparently the social upset of the century. Zarin's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment, like a hologram experiencing a brief power fluctuation. You choose Lyra? That's what I said. Kale kept his voice steady, though he was beginning to suspect he'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a simple selection ceremony. Is there a problem with my choice? One of the nobles on the floating platforms called out something in rapid Calathian that sounded distinctly like a question. Another responded with what could only be described as alien profanity, based on the way several others gasped. They're asking if you're suffering from neural damage, Lyra said quietly, speaking for the first time since the ceremony began. Her voice carried the same musical quality as other Calathians, but with an undertone that sounded almost amused. Well, that's flattering, Kale replied. Though to be fair, I did get hit in the head quite a bit yesterday. Marcus shot him a look that clearly said, "What the hell are you doing?" But Cale was committed now. Besides, something about this whole situation felt like theater, and he'd never been one to stick to the script. Zarin recovered her composure with visible effort. "Of course, the choice is yours to make. However, I feel obligated to point out that Lyra is not enhanced like her sisters." "Enhanced how?" Cale asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Genetic optimization," one of the perfect daughters offered helpfully. "Neural pathway enhancement for increased empathy and compatibility. Pheromone regulation for optimal attraction responses. Cellular regeneration for extended youth and beauty. Standard modifications for any proper companion." "Ah," Cale said. "So you're all basically custom-built to be irresistible." "The term custom-built is rather crude," Zarin interjected, "but essentially accurate. My daughters represent centuries of genetic refinement and billions of credits in development costs." "And Lyra is unmodified," Zarin said, the words carrying a weight that suggested this was somehow shameful. "She chose to refuse the enhancement procedures." Cale looked at Lyra with renewed interest. "You turned down genetic perfection?" "I had my reasons," she said simply. Another burst of alien chatter erupted from the observing nobles, and this time Cale caught what sounded like numbers being thrown around. "Large numbers. They're revising their betting pools," Lyra explained. "Your choice has apparently created what they're calling a statistical impossibility." "Happy to help," Cale said. "I've always been good at ruining people's predictions." Marcus cleared his throat. "Not to interrupt this fascinating cultural exchange, but what exactly happens now? Do we get a manual or something?" Zarin seemed to shake herself back to the present moment. "Yes, of course. The bonding period will commence immediately. Each pair will be assigned private quarters in the residential tower, where you will have time to become acquainted." Her smile returned, though it looked slightly strained around the edges. "The duration varies depending on compatibility metrics." "Compatibility metrics?" Marcus echoed. "Biometric monitoring, psychological assessment, pheromone analysis," one of the nobles called out helpfully. "Standard procedure for determining optimal pairing duration." "Right," Cale said. "Because nothing says romance like having your biochemistry monitored by alien scientists." Lyra made a sound that might have been a stifled laugh. When he glanced at her, she was looking at him with something that might have been approval. "The monitoring is for your own safety," Zarin insisted. "Incompatible pairings can result in unfortunate side effects, such as neurological feedback loops, empathic overload, occasional spontaneous combustion." "Spontaneous combustion?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Very rare," Zarin assured him. "Usually only occurs with extreme genetic incompatibility." "Well, that's comforting," Cale muttered. "Good thing I chose the unenhanced one. Lower chance of accidentally igniting." This time Lyra definitely laughed, a sound like water running over stones. Several of her sisters turned to stare at her in apparent shock. "What?" one of them asked. What was amusing about the combustion reference? "Human humor," Lyra explained. "It's more complex than our behavioral models predicted." The perfect daughter frowned. But the compatibility algorithms should have accounted for humor differentials. "They did," Lyra said. "That's what makes it interesting." Zarin clapped her hands together, producing a crystalline chime that drew everyone's attention. Enough speculation. The pairs will now be escorted to their assigned quarters for the beginning of the bonding process. Attendants appeared as if from nowhere, each one carrying what looked like a small device that projected holographic maps. Marcus was guided toward one of the gravity lifts along with his chosen companion, who was already engaging him in conversation about human dietary requirements. Cale found himself standing beside Lyra as their own attendant approached. Up close, he could see that while she lacked her sister's genetic enhancements, there was something compelling about her features. Intelligence, certainly, but also a kind of quiet strength that the perfect beauty somehow lacked. "So," he said as they walked toward their assigned lift, Any advice for surviving this whole bonding process without spontaneously combusting? Don't overthink it, she replied. And try not to let the monitoring equipment make you too self-conscious. It's less intrusive than it sounds. That's reassuring. Though I have to ask, why did you refuse the genetic modifications? Seems like a pretty sweet deal. Lyra was quiet for a moment as they stepped into the gravity lift. Because some things are more valuable than perfection, she said finally. Such as... She looked at him with those two knowing eyes. You chose me over 4 genetically perfect alternatives. I think you already know the answer to that question. As the lift began its descent toward their new quarters, Cale reflected that she was probably right. Though he was beginning to suspect that understanding the answer and surviving its implications might be two very different things. The quarters assigned to them could have housed a small village, assuming that village wanted floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Calitha's impossible skyline. Cale stood in what he assumed was the main living area, watching gravity-defying vehicles weave between distant spires while trying to process the fact that the furniture seemed to be growing out of the floor. The molecular assemblers respond to biometric preferences, Lyra explained, noticing his confusion. They're reading your comfort requirements and adjusting accordingly. As if to demonstrate, a chair extruded itself from the seamless floor material, its shape shifting until it matched the exact curve of Cale's spine. He sat down experimentally and found it perfectly comfortable. That's either really convenient or deeply unsettling, he said. I can't decide which. Both, probably. Lyra moved to one of the walls, which immediately began displaying what looked like a control interface. Would you like to see the compatibility monitoring setup? It might help you feel less paranoid about being watched. I'm not paranoid. I just prefer my surveillance to be honest about itself. She touched something on the wall display, and suddenly the air around them filled with floating holographic readouts. Heart rate, brain activity, hormone levels, even something labeled psychological stress coefficients in flowing Calathian script. Well, that's comprehensive, Cale said, watching his own vital signs pulse in real-time displays. Though I have to say, seeing my stress levels projected in 3-dimensional color isn't exactly helping them go down. The system will adapt. It's designed to become less intrusive as subjects grow comfortable with the monitoring. Lyra gestured to another set of displays. These track compatibility markers, pheromone responses, neural pattern synchronization, empathic resonance. Empathic resonance. The degree to which your emotional states begin to mirror each other. It's considered a key indicator of successful bonding. Cale studied the readouts, noting that several of the compatibility markers were already showing activity. Is it normal for these to be active this quickly? Lyra paused, her attention focused on one particular display that was pulsing with soft blue light. No, she said quietly. It usually takes days for neural synchronization to begin. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure. She moved closer to examine the data, and Cale noticed that her proximity made several of the displays brighten noticeably. The patterns are unusual. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication, and Zaren's image materialized in the center of the room. Even as a hologram, she managed to look imposing. I trust you're settling in comfortably, she said, though her eyes were clearly focused on the compatibility displays floating around them. The early readings are quite interesting. Interesting how? Cale asked. Well, typically human subjects require significant adjustment periods. Your species tends to resist psychic resonance. Yet your neural patterns are already showing remarkable synchronization with Lyra's. Maybe we're just naturally compatible, Cale suggested. Zaren's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Perhaps. Or perhaps there are factors we haven't yet identified. The hologram shifted to face Lyra directly. Have you been entirely forthcoming about your modifications, daughter? Lyra's expression didn't change, but Cale caught a subtle tension in her posture. I told you I refused the enhancement procedures. Yes, you did. But refusing enhancement is not the same as remaining unmodified, is it? The silence that followed felt heavy with implications Cale didn't understand. Finally, Lyra spoke. I underwent experimental neural restructuring 3 years ago. Not enhancement, modification. What kind of modification? Kale asked. Psychic sensitivity amplification, Zarin answered before Lyra could respond. An extremely dangerous procedure that suppressed her physical modifications in exchange for enhanced telepathic abilities. Telepathic abilities, Kale repeated slowly. As in, reading minds? Among other things, Lyra said quietly. Though it's not quite as simple as reading minds. It's more like sensing emotional resonance patterns, neural echoes. And the physical cost was your enhanced beauty? The procedure required redirecting genetic resources from cosmetic modifications to neural development. The result was... She gestured at herself. This. Hence the family embarrassment, Kale said, understanding dawning. You traded perfection for power, and nobody knew what to do with you. Zarin's hologram flickered with what might have been annoyance. The procedure was unauthorized and extremely risky. She could have died. But I didn't, Lyra said firmly. And the abilities I gained are considerably more useful than enhanced pheromone production. Useful for what? Kale asked. Before Lyra could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the tower. The holographic displays around them suddenly blazed with urgent red warnings, and Zarin's image became more focused, more present. What's happening? Kale demanded. Security breach, Zarin said tersely. Someone has infiltrated the lower levels. All bonding chambers are being sealed as a precaution. Infiltrated how? Lyra asked. The tower's security systems are supposedly impenetrable. Apparently not as impenetrable as we believed. Zarin's attention was clearly divided between their conversation and whatever crisis was unfolding elsewhere. You will remain in your quarters until the situation is resolved. The hologram vanished, leaving Kale and Lyra alone with the flashing warning displays and the distant sound of alarms echoing through the tower's corridors. Well, Kale said, settling back into his perfectly calibrated chair, this is cozy. Nothing like a security crisis to really bring people together. Lyra was studying the warning displays with obvious concern. This isn't random, she said. The infiltration points correspond to the tower's primary data networks. How can you tell? Because I can sense the disruption patterns in the building's neural grid. Someone's not just breaking in, they're systematically accessing information systems. Kale watched her face as she concentrated on whatever psychic signals she was receiving. Can you tell who it is? No, but... She paused, her expression shifting to something like recognition. There's something familiar about the neural patterns. Almost like... Like what? She turned to look at him, and for the first time since they'd met, she seemed genuinely surprised. Like they're looking for you. Looking for me specifically? Kale tried to keep his voice light, but something cold was settling in his stomach. That's either very flattering or very bad news. Lyra pressed her fingers to her temples, her eyes closed in concentration. The neural patterns are human, but not entirely. There's something else mixed in. Something artificial. Artificial how? Like cybernetic enhancement, but more integrated than anything I've seen before. She opened her eyes, studying him with new intensity. Kale, what exactly did you do before you ended up in the gladiatorial games? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Kale found himself caught between honesty and self-preservation, a position he'd been in far too often lately. I was a maintenance engineer on a mining station, he said carefully. Nothing particularly exciting. Try again. Her voice was gentle but firm. Remember, I can sense emotional resonance. Your stress levels just spiked dramatically. Right. The telepathy thing. Kale rubbed his forehead. I keep forgetting about that. It's more complex than simple telepathy, but yes. And you're radiating deception patterns like a beacon. The alarms had shifted to a different tone, more urgent and somehow more directed. Through the massive windows, Kale could see security vehicles swarming the tower's lower levels, their searchlights cutting through the violet haze that perpetually shrouded the city. "Okay," he said finally. "Maybe my background is a little more complicated than I initially let on." "How complicated?" "The kind of complicated that apparently gets people to infiltrate alien fortress towers to find me." Lyra moved to the wall interface, her fingers dancing across holographic controls with practiced ease. "I'm accessing the tower's security feeds. Maybe we can see what we're dealing with." Multiple screens materialized around them, showing various angles of the infiltration in progress. What Kale saw made his blood run cold. 3 figures were moving through the tower's service corridors with impossible efficiency, avoiding security patrols with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of the building's layout. They wore form-fitting armor that seemed to bend light around them, making them difficult to focus on even through the security cameras. "They're good," Lyra observed. "Almost too good. How do you know people like this?" "I don't," Kale said, then paused. "At least, I don't think I do." "You don't think you do? It's complicated." One of the intruders looked directly up at a security camera, and Kale's world tilted sideways. The face was human, but wrong in subtle ways. The proportions were too perfect, the movements too fluid, the eyes too bright with internal light. "Oh," he said quietly. "That's not good. You know him." "Her." "And yes, I think I do." Kale slumped into his chair, which immediately adjusted to support his sudden slump in posture. "Her name is Sarah Chen. We worked together on the mining station." "The one you were supposedly just a maintenance engineer on?" "Yeah, about that." Kale watched Sarah disable a security barrier with movements too fast for normal human reflexes. "The mining station was a cover. We were actually part of a research project. Experimental cybernetic integration." "You're a cyborg?" "Not exactly. More like enhanced human. Neural implants, genetic modifications, accelerated healing. The works." He gestured at the screen where Sarah was now climbing through a ventilation shaft with spider-like agility. "Sarah got more extensive modifications than I did." "And now she's here to rescue you?" "That's what worries me. Because the last time I saw Sarah, she was trying to kill me." Lyra stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" Project Blue Sky wasn't exactly voluntary. When some of us tried to leave, things got messy. Kale watched the security feeds with growing unease. Sarah was one of the true believers. She thought the modifications made us superior to baseline humans. "And you disagreed?" "I thought they made us into weapons. Turned out I was right." Another alarm tone joined the cacophony, this one indicating that the intruders had reached the residential levels. Lyra's fingers flew across the interface controls, accessing deeper security protocols. "They've bypassed 17 security checkpoints in under 10 minutes, she said. "That's not just enhanced, that's impossible." "Unless you know exactly how the security systems work," Kale said grimly. "Which Sarah would, if she's been monitoring Calathian technology." "Monitoring how?" "The same way we ended up as gladiators. Blue Sky had agents everywhere, gathering intelligence on alien tech." He stood up, pacing to the window. "We were supposed to be humanity's answer to alien superiority. Super soldiers who could infiltrate and sabotage from within." "But you escaped?" "Barely. And apparently not as completely as I thought." Lyra joined him at the window, her proximity making the compatibility displays flare with soft blue light. "The neural synchronization between us, is that because of your modifications?" "Probably. Sarah always said the implants would make us more compatible with alien psychic abilities." He glanced at her. "Though I have to admit, I didn't expect it to work quite this well." "The readings are still accelerating," she observed. "At this rate, we'll achieve full empathic resonance within hours instead of weeks." "Is that dangerous?" "For normal subjects, extremely. For someone with your modifications." She paused, studying the data streams. "Actually, I'm not sure. This is unprecedented. A new sound joined the alarms, the distinct whine of energy weapons being discharged somewhere in the tower. The security feed showed Calathian guards engaging the intruders, their elegant weapons crackling with contained lightning. Sarah and her team responded with weapons that seemed to tear holes in reality itself. "Well," Kale said, watching a guard disappear in a flash of distorted spacetime that escalated quickly. "Your friend has some impressive equipment. She always was good with weapons. It was one of her more terrifying qualities." Lyra suddenly gripped his arm, her eyes wide with alarm. "They're not just heading for us. They're heading for the Central Data Core." "What's in the Central Data Core?" "Everything. Tower schematics, genetic databases, compatibility algorithms." She turned to face him fully. "If they access that information, they'll know everything about Calathian enhancement technology. And that's bad because someone with your modifications and access to our genetic engineering capabilities could create an army of perfect infiltrators." Kale stared at her as the implications sank in. An army that could pass for human but have all the advantages of alien technology. Exactly. Through the windows, more security vehicles were arriving, but Kale could see they were too late. The damage was already being done, and Sarah had always been very good at her job. "So," he said, trying for levity in the face of impending disaster, "on a scale of 1 to galactic catastrophe, how screwed are we?" "I'd say we've moved well beyond the scale," Lyra replied. "We're in uncharted territory now." "Great. I always wanted to be a pioneer." The lights went out 3 seconds before Sarah Chen materialized in their quarters like a nightmare given form. Her adaptive camouflage armor flickered as it adjusted to the room's ambient lighting, and when she smiled, Kale could see the telltale gleam of reinforced dental implants. "Hello, Kale," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that no unmodified human throat could produce. "Miss me?" "About as much as I miss having my appendix removed," Kale replied, stepping protectively in front of Lyra. "What do you want, Sarah?" "What I've always wanted. To complete the mission." Her gaze shifted to Lyra with predatory interest. "Though I have to admit, your choice in companions has improved considerably. An unenhanced Calathian with experimental psychic modifications? That's either brilliant strategy or remarkable luck." "How did you know about her abilities?" "Really, Kale, we've been monitoring Calathian enhancement programs for years." Lyra's little experiment was all over their research networks. Sarah took a step closer, and Kale noticed that her movements were too fluid, too perfect. "The question is whether you chose her randomly or if those neural implants are finally working the way they were supposed to." Lyra moved to stand beside Kale rather than behind him. "The implants are resonating with my psychic abilities, aren't they? That's why the compatibility readings accelerated so quickly." "Very good," Sarah said approvingly. "Yes, Kale's modifications were specifically designed to interface with alien psychic technology. He's not just enhanced, he's a living bridge between human and alien neural systems." "A bridge you can control," Kale said grimly. "Control is such an ugly word. I prefer direct. And with access to Calathian genetic databases." Sarah gestured around the room, where her team members were now visible, having dropped their camouflage. "We can create an entire generation of perfect infiltrators." "Perfect for what?" Lyra asked. "For taking back what's ours," Sarah replied, her smile turning cold. "Humanity didn't ask to become subjects in an alien empire. It's time we reminded the galaxy why Earth produced the most dangerous predators in known space." Kale felt something shift in his mind, a subtle pressure that reminded him of the neural conditioning sessions back on the station. Sarah was trying to activate override protocols in his implants. "Sorry," he said, fighting back a grin. "But I had those removed." Sarah's confident expression flickered. "Impossible. The neural integration is permanent." "Turns out Calathian healing technology is really thorough," Lyra said helpfully. "When they repaired Kale's injuries from the gladiatorial games, Their medical systems identified and neutralized several foreign neural interfaces. You're lying. Check for yourself, Kale suggested. Though fair warning, trying to force a psychic connection with someone who's bonded to a telepath might be a bit overwhelming. Sarah's eyes narrowed, and Kale felt her attempt to establish a neural link. What she found instead was the full force of his and Lyra's synchronized consciousness, backed by Calathian psychic enhancement technology. The feedback sent Sarah stumbling backward, her enhanced reflexes the only thing keeping her upright. What did you do to me? Nothing permanent, Lyra said. Though you might experience some disorientation while your neural pathways recalibrate. This isn't over, Sarah snarled, signaling to her team. We have what we came for. Actually, Zaren's voice echoed through the room as her image materialized. You don't. Sarah spun to face the hologram. Lady Zaren. How nice to see you again. I wish I could say the same. Did you really think we wouldn't have safeguards against data theft? Zaren's smile was arctic. The information you stole from our databases is quite thoroughly corrupted. Attempting to use it will result in spectacular genetic failures. You're bluffing. Am I? Your own enhanced physiology is already beginning to show signs of degradation. How long do you think you have before those beautiful modifications start eating you alive? Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, where Kale could now see a faint discoloration spreading beneath her skin. The virus was embedded in the data you accessed, Zaren continued conversationally. It targets synthetic neural interfaces and genetic modifications. Quite elegant, really. There must be an antidote, Sarah said, her voice losing its artificial harmonics. Of course there is. In exchange for your withdrawal from Calathian space and a formal agreement to cease infiltration activities. Sarah looked at Kale with something that might have been betrayal. You planned this. Actually, no, Kale said. I'm as surprised as you are. Though I have to admit, it's nice to be on the winning side for once. The antidote will be transmitted to your ship's medical bay within the hour, Zaren said. Your team has that long to reach minimum safe distance from the planet. Sarah's armor shimmered as her team prepared to leave. This isn't over, Kale. Yes, it is, he replied quietly. The person you knew died in that laboratory. I'm someone else now. After they left, the room felt strangely empty. Kale slumped into his chair, which immediately adjusted to support his exhausted posture. Well, he said, that was intense. Do all family reunions involve biological warfare? Only the good ones, Lyra replied, settling into her own chair. Though I have to ask, did you really have the override protocols removed? Partially. Enough to prevent remote control, anyway. He gestured at the compatibility displays, which were now showing unprecedented levels of neural synchronization. Though I think the real protection came from this. Hard to override someone's mind when it's linked to someone else's. The bonding process, Lyra realized. It created a feedback loop that protected both of us. Exactly. Two minds are harder to hack than one. Zaren's hologram flickered back to life. I trust the situation has been resolved to your satisfaction? More or less, Kale said. Though I'm curious about something. How long have you known about Project Blue Sky? Since we first encountered enhanced humans in our space. Did you think your people were the only ones conducting intelligence operations? Zaren's smile was almost fond. We've been watching your species for quite some time, Kale. You're remarkably adaptable. Adaptable enough to stay here permanently? That depends. Are you interested in a career change? Our intelligence services could use someone with your unique qualifications. Kale looked at Lyra, who was studying the compatibility readouts with obvious fascination. What do you think? Want to save the galaxy with a reformed super soldier? Someone has to keep you out of trouble, she said. And the neural synchronization data alone will revolutionize our understanding of interspecies psychic bonding. So that's a yes? That's a yes. Though I insist on proper laboratory facilities and unlimited research funding. Done, Zarin said immediately. "Welcome to the Calathian Intelligence Service. Try not to blow anything up on your first day." As the hologram faded, Kale realized that for the first time in years, he actually felt hopeful about the future. He'd started this journey as a reluctant gladiator, chosen what seemed like the worst possible option, and somehow ended up with exactly what he needed. "You know," he said to Lyra, "when you chose to refuse genetic perfection, did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" "I had a feeling something interesting would happen eventually," she replied. "Though I have to admit, reformed cyborg spy wasn't exactly what I had in mind." "Life rarely goes according to plan." "No," she agreed, her hand finding his as the compatibility displays blazed with synchronized harmony. "But sometimes the detours are worth it." Outside their window, Calith stretched toward the stars, full of possibilities neither of them had imagined when this strange adventure began. The end.